The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Session 3, Unit 10, Lesson 6. When the dance was at an end, Ichabod joined a group of folks who were gossiping over old times and telling long stories about the Revolutionary War. Sleepy Hollow was a place around which great men had done great deeds. The British and Americans had run near it during the war, and just enough time had passed for each storyteller to dress up his tale and make himself the hero of every adventure. But all these stories paled in comparison to the dark tales of the favorite spectre of Sleepy Hollow, the Headless Horseman. Some said that lately he had been heard several times galloping around the country. Brom Bones himself said that one night he had seen the Headless Horseman, and dared him to race. He said he should have won, too, for Daredevil had beaten the Goblin Horse. But just as they came to the church bridge, the Hessian bolted and vanished in a flash of fire. Ichabod added a great many tales of his own to these, but the men's words sank deep into his mind. The party slowly broke up. Each headed his way in a wagon or on foot, rattling along the roads and over the distant hills. Ichabod stayed behind to talk with Katrina. What they said I do not know, but something must have gone wrong, because he left, crestfallen, shortly after. He roused his steed from the stable and began his ride home. Under the darkening skies all the terrifying stories he had heard in the afternoon now came crowding into his mind. He had never felt so lonely and dismal. Suddenly he heard a groan. Ichabod's teeth chattered. His knees knocked against the saddle. But the noise was only the rubbing of one tree branch against another, as they were swaying about in the breeze. Then, as he approached the bridge, he saw something huge and towering in the shadows. It did not stir, but it seemed to gather up in the gloom, like some gigantic monster ready to spring upon him. Ichabod's hair rose from terror. What has to be done? It was too late to turn and flee. Besides, what chance was there of escaping a ghost or goblin, if such it was, that could ride upon the wings of the wind? Making a show of courage, Ichabod demanded, "Who are you?" He received no reply. Ichabod shut his eyes and began singing a solemn tune. Just then the shadowy thing put itself in motion. What a scramble and a bound! It shook at once in the middle of the road. It appeared to be a huge horseman, mounted on a powerful black horse. He said no word, but jogged along beside old Gunpowder. Ichabod remembered the adventure of Brom Bones with the Headless Horseman. He spurred his own horse, hoping to leave his strange midnight companion behind, but the stranger quickened his horse to an equal pace. Ichabod pulled up and fell into a walk, thinking a lag behind. The horseman did the same. Ichabod's heart began to sink within him. He tried to sing, but his parched tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He could not utter a note. As they broke through the trees, Ichabod saw his fellow traveler in relief against the sky. He was gigantic in height and muffled in a cloak, but Ichabod was horror-struck when he saw that the horseman was headless. His horror grew when he saw that the head, which should have rested on his shoulders, was carried before him on the pommel of his saddle. Ichabod's terror rose to desperation. He rained a shower of kicks and blows upon Gunpowder. He hoped to give the horseman the slip, but the spectre kept pace with him. Away they dashed through thick and thin. Stones flew and sparks flashed at every bound. So far, Gunpowder's panic had given Ichabod a few steps ahead in the chase. But just as he got halfway through the hollow, the girth of the saddle broke. The saddle fell to the ground. He heard it trampled underfoot by the monstrous horseman. Ichabod had much ado to stay on the horse's back. Sometimes he slipped to one side, sometimes to the other, and sometimes he was jolted on the high ridge of the horse's backbone with a violence that he feared would split him in two. An opening in the trees now cheered him with the hopes that the church bridge was near. He saw the walls of the church dimly glaring under the trees beyond. He remembered the place where Brom Bones' ghostly competitor had disappeared. "If I can only reach that bridge," thought Ichabod, "I am safe." Just then he heard the black steed panting and blowing close behind him. He fancied that he felt the horse's hot breath. Another kick in the ribs, and old Gunpowder sprang upon the bridge. He thundered over the planks and reached the opposite side. Ichabod looked back to see if the pursuer would vanish, as the stories told, in a flash of fire. But just then he saw the thing rising in its stirrup. It drew back its hand to hurl its head at Ichabod. Ichabod tried to dodge the horrible missile, but too late. It hit the terrified schoolteacher's head with a tremendous crash. He tumbled into the dust. Gunpowder, the black steed, and the horsemen passed by like a whirlwind. The next morning the old horse was found without its saddle, nibbling the grass at its master's gate. Ichabod did not appear at breakfast or at the schoolhouse. The Hollow folk searched for him, but they found only the saddle trampled in the dirt, the tracks of horses' hoofs deeply dented in the road, and the hat of the unfortunate Ichabod, and, close beside it, a shattered pumpkin. The mysterious event caused much talk at the church the following Sunday. Knots of gazers and gossips were collected in the churchyard, at the bridge, and at the spot where the hat and pumpkin had been found. They shook their heads and came to the conclusion that Ichabod had been carried off by the headless horseman. Some years later an old farmer said that Ichabod Crane was still alive. He said that the schoolmaster had left the hollow partly through fear of the horsemen, and partly in embarrassment at being jilted by Katrina. The farmer said Ichabod had moved far away and became a judge in a court. Shortly after Ichabod disappeared, Brom Bones married Katrina, and whenever the story of Ichabod was related, he always got a very knowing look and burst into a hearty laugh at the mention of the pumpkin. It led some to suspect that he knew more about the matter than he chose to tell. The old country wives, however, who are the best judges of these matters, maintain to this day that Ichabod was spirited away by the supernatural means. It is a favorite story often told about the neighborhood round the winter evening fire. The schoolhouse had since fallen into decay, and had been reported to be haunted by Ichabod's ghost. And on a still summer evening, some say they hear Ichabod's voice at a distance, chanting a melancholy psalm tune among the tranquil solitudes of Sleepy Hollow. The end.